celebrate the development, while others are accusing the U.S.
At 3:17 a.m., somewhere in the dark waters of the Middle East, every radar screen aboard one of America's most powerful warships lit up at the same time. What appeared first as a faint anomaly instantly multiplied into a single, unmistakable threat. A hypersonic signature, too fast, too precise, too deliberate to be an accident. According to leaked reports, the launch did not come from the sea, but from deep inland. A new generation missile, publicly unveiled only months earlier, was now allegedly airborne. Its target locked on the USS Abraham Lincoln, a symbol of U.S. military dominance and a floating city carrying thousands of lives. For the first time, this ship was no longer hunting, it was being hunted. What followed, sources claim, was a countdown measured not in minutes, but in seconds. Inside the carrier's command center, alarms cut through the routine hum of operations. Interceptors were armed, electronic warfare systems activated, satellites shifted their gaze. This was not a drill. The missile, said to be the Fattah, was reportedly maneuvering mid-flight, changing altitude and trajectory in ways that challenged existing defense models. Analysts would later say this was the moment military doctrine entered unfamiliar territory. Then came the silence. Some accounts suggest the missile was intercepted at the last possible moment, its debris splashing into the sea less than 10 miles from the carrier group. Others claim it never reached that point, neutralized instead by a classified system the Pentagon has never officially acknowledged. What is certain is that within minutes, the region moved to the edge of open war. The U.S. response, according to unnamed officials, was immediate and overwhelming, but not in the way anyone expected. No public strikes, no press conference, no dramatic show of force. Instead, something far more unsettling happened. Naval assets quietly repositioned. Communication channels went dark. And a wave of cyber disruptions reportedly swept across multiple military networks in the region, leaving commanders blind at a critical moment. For nearly 12 hours, the world heard nothing. Markets trembled. Intelligence agencies scrambled. Social media filled the vacuum with speculation, fragments of satellite images, and unverified audio recordings allegedly captured by civilian ships nearby. Governments issued vague statements urging restraint, while preparing for the worst behind closed doors. When the silence finally broke, it wasn't with explosions, but with a single sentence from Washington. The situation is under control. But controlled by whom? And at what cost? Was this a failed attack that nearly rewrote naval warfare? A calculated test of American defenses? Or the opening move in a conflict designed to stay just below the threshold of full-scale war? In this video, we will reconstruct the timeline minute by minute, examine the weapon that may have changed the balance at sea, and uncover why the U.S. response shocked allies and adversaries alike. Not because of what was done, but because of what wasn't. This wasn't just an attack, it may have been a message. The beginning of the attack was marked not by explosions, but by a sudden shift in posture inside Iranian military command structures, according to later intelligence assessments from United States analysts. In the hours leading up to the launch, Iranian air defense units along the coast were reportedly placed on heightened alert, and several radar installations were temporarily taken offline, a move consistent with known Iranian doctrine aimed at masking missile preparations. Officially, nothing unusual was detected, but satellite imagery later showed increased activity at a missile base in central Iran, a site previously associated with testing advanced solid fuel systems. The missile believed to be involved, known publicly as the Fattah, had been unveiled as a hypersonic-capable weapon with maneuvering abilities designed to evade interception. And while its full operational readiness was still debated among experts, most agreed that Iran possessed at least a limited number of deployable units. At approximately 3:17 a.m. local time, early warning systems operated by the United States detected an anomalous launch profile originating far inland, well beyond Iran's coastline. Unlike conventional ballistic launches, this trajectory appeared flatter and more dynamic, suggesting a boost glide phase rather than a simple ballistic arc. Within seconds, automated systems aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln carrier strike group elevated their threat level, shifting from routine monitoring to active defense posture. Sailors were reportedly ordered to battle stations, and escorting destroyers began powering up their Aegis combat systems, a standard but serious step that signals an imminent engagement. What made the situation especially tense was the missile's speed. Estimates placed it well above Mach 10 during mid-course flight, compressing the decision window to a fraction of what commanders normally expect. According to partially declassified briefings, the missile's guidance appeared unusually adaptive. It executed at least 2 mid-course adjustments, altering altitude and vector in a way consistent with Iran's claims about terminal maneuverability, though analysts later debated whether this was true maneuvering or simply the result of atmospheric effects exaggerated by sensor noise. For those tracking it in real time, however, the distinction hardly mattered. The missile was heading toward a zone occupied by one of the most valuable naval assets in the world. Some reports suggest that Iranian operators deliberately delayed activating full guidance until late in the flight, a tactic intended to reduce the effectiveness of long-range interceptors. As the missile crossed a critical threshold distance, U.S. naval defenses transitioned from detection to engagement planning. Interceptor missiles were armed but not immediately launched, a decision attributed to strict rules of engagement and uncertainty about whether the incoming object was a direct attack or a high-risk demonstration shot intended to fall short. This hesitation, lasting perhaps only seconds, later became a subject of intense internal debate. Iranian state-linked media would later claim that the missile had successfully locked on to the carrier, a statement that cannot be independently verified, but aligns with the psychological objectives of such a strike. Whether the missile was ultimately neutralized by an interceptor, diverted by electronic warfare, or programmed to miss remains officially undisclosed. What is known is that its approach marked the first time a hypersonic-capable weapon was believed to have been used in a real-world confrontation against an active U.S. carrier group. Even if the attack caused no physical damage, it shattered long-held assumptions about maritime dominance and exposed how narrow the margin for error had become. In that sense, the opening moments of the attack were less about destruction and more about signaling, a calculated demonstration by Iran that modern naval power could be challenged in ways that were once considered theoretical. The choice of target transformed the incident from a regional provocation into a global shock. The USS Abraham Lincoln was not just another vessel operating in contested waters. It was a Nimitz-class aircraft carrier, a cornerstone of American naval power, and a symbol carefully calibrated to send messages of deterrence wherever it sailed. According to standard deployments, such a carrier strike group represents billions of dollars in hardware, more than 5,000 personnel, and the ability to project air power hundreds of miles inland. By directing a missile toward this specific ship, Iranian planners were understood to be making a statement aimed not only at the United States military, but at its allies and adversaries alike. At the time of the alleged attack, the carrier was operating as part of a broader maritime presence intended to secure shipping lanes and reassure regional partners. Publicly released schedules suggested routine flight operations were underway, with fighter aircraft cycling through training missions and early morning patrols. Privately, however, intelligence sources later claimed that the carrier group had already been operating under elevated alert due to recent threats and increased Iranian military exercises inland. This context made the selection of the USS Abraham Lincoln particularly consequential, as any successful strike, or even a near miss, would have immediate strategic and psychological effects. Targeting an aircraft carrier is widely regarded as one of the most complex challenges in modern warfare. These ships are constantly moving, protected by layered defenses, and surrounded by escort vessels equipped with advanced radar and missile interception systems. Iranian military doctrine has long emphasized asymmetric strategies, focusing on methods that exploit cost imbalances and technological vulnerabilities. Rather than attempting to destroy a carrier outright, analysts believe the objective was to demonstrate that such a ship could be tracked, threatened, and forced into defensive action. In this sense, the USS Abraham Lincoln was less a target for destruction than a stage for signaling capability. Reports circulated that Iranian surveillance assets, including over-the-horizon radar systems and satellite data obtained through indirect partnerships, had been monitoring the carrier's movements for days. While Iran's ability to maintain continuous, precise tracking of a carrier group remains debated, most experts agree that periodic location fixes would be sufficient for a demonstration strike. Some unconfirmed accounts even suggested that Iranian operators deliberately selected a moment when the carrier was conducting routine operations, maximizing the visibility and perceived vulnerability of the ship without necessarily intending to cause mass casualties. Inside the carrier strike group, the realization that the USS Abraham Lincoln itself was the intended target reportedly altered command priorities instantly. Escort ships tightened their formation, aircraft already in the air were redirected, and non-essential operations were suspended. For the crew, the abstraction of geopolitical rivalry collapsed into something immediate and personal. The idea that a single missile, traveling at extreme speed, could potentially threaten a floating city underscored the stakes involved. Even if defenses held, the psychological impact was unavoidable. From a strategic perspective, the targeting of the carrier also carried escalation risks. An attack on a U.S. aircraft carrier has historically been treated as a potential casus belli, a red line that could justify overwhelming retaliation. Iranian decision-makers were likely aware of this, which is why many analysts believe the strike was calibrated to fall just short of causing irreversible damage. By aiming at the USS Abraham Lincoln and stopping short of a confirmed hit, Iran could claim a show of strength while preserving a degree of plausible deniability and limiting the pressure for an immediate kinetic response. In the aftermath, military analysts around the world focused less on whether the carrier had been damaged and more on the implications of its selection as a target. The message was clear. Even the most heavily defended symbols of naval dominance were no longer untouchable. For Iran, the act reinforced its narrative of deterrence and technological progress. For the United States, it exposed how much strategic weight rests on a small number of highly visible assets. And for everyone watching, the targeting of the USS Abraham Lincoln marked a moment when theoretical threats edged closer to reality, reshaping assumptions about power at sea. Once the initial threat had been identified and the carrier strike group fully understood that it was operating under direct risk, the focus shifted entirely to defense and reaction. The USS Abraham Lincoln's layered protection systems, long regarded as among the most sophisticated ever deployed at sea, were now being tested under conditions that planners had only simulated. As discussed earlier, the missile approach itself had already challenged expectations, but what followed revealed how modern naval combat unfolds less as a single dramatic exchange and more as a cascade of tightly sequenced decisions made under extreme pressure. Escorting cruisers and destroyers assumed specialized roles almost instantly, some prioritizing radar tracking and fire control, others focusing on electronic countermeasures designed to confuse or degrade any incoming guidance. This redistribution of tasks was executed automatically through pre-planned doctrines, yet human judgment still played a decisive role in determining timing and escalation thresholds. As the situation evolved, U.S. commanders reportedly authorized the activation of defensive measures that are rarely used outside of major exercises. Advanced jamming systems were brought online, flooding key frequency bands with interference intended to obscure the carrier group's precise position and disrupt any follow-on targeting. At the same time, interceptor crews prepared for multiple engagement scenarios rather than a single shot, reflecting the growing concern that the initial missile might not be the only threat. Although no second launch was detected, intelligence officers later suggested that the mere possibility of a coordinated salvo influenced every subsequent decision. This period marked the true transition from alert status to an active combat posture, even if no direct impact ultimately occurred. The U.S. response, once the immediate danger appeared to have passed, did not follow the familiar pattern of rapid, visible retaliation. Instead, actions unfolded across several domains almost simultaneously, many of them deliberately opaque. Naval aviation assets were quietly repositioned, extending patrol ranges and altering flight patterns in ways that would be noticeable only to those watching closely. Subsurface forces, whose movements are rarely acknowledged publicly, were reportedly tasked with contingency missions designed to signal readiness without crossing into overt confrontation. In parallel, cyber units initiated operations aimed at mapping and, where possible, temporarily degrading Iranian command and control networks, a response that aligned with broader U.S. doctrine emphasizing proportional but multidimensional retaliation. What surprised many observers was the restraint shown in the immediate aftermath. Despite political pressure to respond decisively, senior leadership in the United States appeared intent on avoiding a rapid kinetic exchange that could spiral beyond control. This restraint, however, did not equate to passivity. Diplomatic channels, some of them long dormant, were quietly activated through intermediaries, conveying clear warnings while stopping short of public ultimatums. The message was calibrated. The capability to respond forcefully was unquestioned, but escalation would not be automatic. This approach reflected lessons learned from previous regional crises, where swift retaliation had often produced unintended consequences. As hours turned into a full day, the incident began to take on a broader international dimension. Allies sought reassurance, while rival powers analyzed the event for insights into both Iranian capabilities and American defensive effectiveness. Intelligence sharing among partner nations intensified, and previously compartmentalized assessments were rapidly circulated to update threat models. At the same time, global shipping companies adjusted routes and insurance rates, responding less to confirmed damage than to perceived instability. These reactions underscored how even a limited confrontation at sea can ripple outward, affecting economic and political calculations far beyond the immediate actors. The maritime engagement itself, while brief in its most acute phase, continued to influence operations for days. U.S. naval forces maintained an elevated posture, conducting exercises that doubled as demonstrations of readiness. These maneuvers, though officially described as routine, were closely watched by regional observers and widely interpreted as a signal that any further provocation would be met with a more direct response. Iranian forces, for their part, also adjusted their posture, increasing patrols and issuing statements emphasizing defensive intent. The absence of further launches suggested that both sides recognized the danger of pushing beyond the ambiguous space they now occupied. International reactions reflected a mixture of concern and calculation. Some governments called for de-escalation and transparency, while others quietly reassessed their own vulnerability to similar tactics. Defense analysts noted that the incident reinforced the growing importance of missile defense and electronic warfare, not only for major powers, but for any state operating high-value assets in contested regions. The perception that advanced weapons could be used for signaling as much as for destruction added a new layer of complexity to strategic planning. In retrospect, the combined sequence of defensive action, measured response, and controlled signaling revealed a form of modern conflict that is neither peace nor full-scale war. The USS Abraham Lincoln episode demonstrated how quickly a localized threat can trigger global attention, and how carefully states now manage the boundary between deterrence and escalation. While no decisive battle occurred, the encounter left a lasting imprint on military thinking, emphasizing that future confrontations may be defined less by visible destruction and more by the silent, high-stakes interplay of technology, perception, and restraint. For Iran and the United States alike, the incident served as a reminder that even limited actions can reshape strategic realities, especially when the world is watching every move. The outcome of the encounter, though it resulted in no confirmed physical destruction, carried consequences that extended far beyond the immediate theater of operations. As mentioned earlier, the incident stopped short of open warfare, yet its strategic impact proved difficult to contain. For military planners, the episode forced a reassessment of long-standing assumptions about deterrence, survivability, and the balance between offense and defense at sea. Even without casualties or visible damage, the mere fact that such a confrontation could unfold challenged the notion that escalation is always tied to kinetic results. Instead, perception itself emerged as a decisive factor. In the weeks that followed, internal reviews within the United States defense establishment reportedly led to adjustments in deployment patterns and readiness protocols. Carrier strike groups operating in high-risk regions began emphasizing dispersion and unpredictability over constant presence, a subtle but meaningful shift. Training scenarios were revised to include compressed decision timelines and ambiguous threat profiles, reflecting lessons drawn from the encounter. While officials publicly downplayed the significance of these changes, analysts noted that such adaptations signaled recognition that the strategic environment had evolved. For Iran, the incident appeared to reinforce its narrative of deterrence through technological advancement. Domestically, the episode was portrayed as evidence that Iran could challenge superior forces without triggering full-scale retaliation. This perception, whether fully grounded in reality or not, strengthened the position of hardline factions advocating continued investment in missile and electronic warfare capabilities. At the same time, Iranian leadership exercised caution, avoiding actions that might force a direct response. This balance between assertiveness and restraint suggested an awareness of the narrow margins separating symbolic success from strategic disaster. On the international stage, the encounter accelerated debates already underway among allied and non-aligned states. Nations reliant on maritime trade began reconsidering the security of key sea lanes, while defense ministries examined whether their own high-value assets were adequately protected against emerging threats. Some countries quietly sought deeper cooperation with major powers on missile defense and intelligence sharing, while others explored indigenous capabilities to reduce dependence on external guarantees. These reactions underscored how a single, contained incident could reshape broader security calculations. Economically, the effects were subtle but measurable. Insurance premiums for shipping in nearby waters rose temporarily, and energy markets reacted with brief volatility before stabilizing. These fluctuations were driven less by concrete damage than by uncertainty, highlighting how modern crises often exert influence through anticipation rather than outcomes. The realization that advanced weapons might be used for signaling rather than destruction added a layer of unpredictability to risk assessments. Perhaps the most enduring consequence lay in the realm of strategic psychology. The incident blurred the line between peace and conflict, reinforcing a model of competition where actions are designed to test limits without crossing them. Both sides appeared to emerge with reinforced caution, aware that future encounters might escalate faster and with less room for ambiguity. As referenced earlier, no decisive victory or defeat occurred, but the absence of resolution itself became a defining feature. In the end, the episode left behind a strategic aftershock rather than a battlefield legacy. It demonstrated that modern confrontations need not produce wreckage to alter the balance of power. By reshaping expectations, influencing doctrine, and amplifying uncertainty, the incident ensured that its true consequences would unfold over time, quietly shaping decisions long after the immediate tension faded from headlines.